Close your eyes and picture Antarctica. You see ice, white, infinite, silent. You are wrong. 90 million years ago, where that ice exists, where temperatures today fall to minus 80 degrees, there were trees, ferns, rivers running warm through dense canopy, insects the size of your fist moving through air thick with humidity and heat, and dinosaurs. Not visiting, living there, born there, dying there. The most isolated continent on Earth was once the most alive place on the planet. We found the proof. Under 2 kilometers of ice, the jungle is still there, waiting.
Forget everything you think you know about Antarctica. The white continent, the dead continent, the place where nothing has ever lived except penguins and the ambitions of explorers, who mostly did not survive. That Antarctica is real, but it is recent. In geological terms, in the deep time that governs this planet's history, the Antarctica you know has existed for approximately 34 million years. Before that, something else entirely. 90 million years ago, the continent we now call Antarctica sat further north on the tectonic plate system, closer to what would become South America and Africa. The global climate was dramatically warmer. Atmospheric CO2 concentrations 3 to 4 times higher than today. The polar ice caps either absent or dramatically reduced. Ocean temperatures warm enough to support tropical ecosystems at latitudes that today are buried under permanent ice. The result? A world that does not match any map you have ever seen. A world where Antarctica had no ice. Where its coastlines were lined with trees, not the sparse, wind-beaten survivors you find at the edge of cold environments today, but true forest. Dense, layered, diverse, ancient. A world where the temperature in what is now the South Pole reached 20 degrees Celsius. A world where something walked through that forest.
In 2020, a team of researchers led by Alfred Wegener Institute published findings from a sediment core drilled from the seafloor of the West Antarctic Rift System. The core came from 27 to 30 meters below the current seafloor. In geological terms, this layer was deposited approximately 90 million years ago, the mid-Cretaceous period, the era of maximum dinosaur diversity on Earth. What the core contained stopped the research team completely. Roots. Not root impressions, not chemical signatures suggesting organic material had once been present. Actual root structures, the fine, complex network of a developed root system, preserved in the sediment with extraordinary detail, individual root cells visible under microscopy. Alongside the roots, pollen. Hundreds of distinct pollen types representing a diverse plant community. Fern spores, flowering plant material. The full biological signature of a temperate to subtropical rainforest, the kind of ecosystem you find today in New Zealand or Patagonia. The researchers calculated the mean annual temperature of that ancient Antarctic environment from the biological evidence. Summer temperatures, 12 to 13 degrees Celsius. Annual mean, approximately 10 degrees. Not cold, not marginal. Warm enough for a functioning rainforest ecosystem, with a closed canopy, meaning a forest dense enough that sunlight barely reached the ground. An Antarctic jungle.
Here is the detail that makes this impossible to dismiss as an interesting geological curiosity. The Antarctic continent sits at the South Pole, then as now. Even 90 million years ago, when the tectonic configuration placed it somewhat differently, it still experienced polar night, months of complete darkness each year, no sunlight reaching the surface. Rainforests require sunlight. A forest growing at the South Pole, even a warm South Pole, had to survive months of absolute darkness every year. The trees grew, the ferns spread, the ecosystem functioned. Through the polar night. How? The researchers proposed that the ancient Antarctic forest operated on a seasonal model of extreme intensity.
photosynthesizing with extraordinary efficiency during the months of continuous polar daylight, then entering a dormancy state during the dark months that no modern tropical forest experiences. The biological equivalent of holding your breath for 3 months, and then exhaling into an explosion of growth when the light returned. This forest was not a weakened version of tropical forests elsewhere on Earth. It was something evolution had specifically designed for this environment, something that existed nowhere else, something uniquely Antarctic, something that had never been studied because we did not know it existed, until we drilled down through 2 kilometers of ice and found its roots.
But roots and pollen are chemistry. Ancient chemistry at extraordinary resolution, yes, but chemistry. The bones are different. The first Antarctic dinosaur was discovered in 1986 on James Ross Island, off the Antarctic Peninsula. A fragmentary skeleton, enough to establish the species, a hadrosaur, a duck-billed herbivore, living at the southern edge of the world during the late Cretaceous. It was a start, not a revelation. The revelation came with Cryolophosaurus elioti, discovered in 1991 in the Transantarctic Mountains by William Hammer's team. Cryolophosaurus was unlike anything found before on the continent. A large theropod, a predator, bipedal, 6 meters in length, built for hunting, with a feature that immediately distinguished it from every dinosaur previously described: a crest. Not the low, rounded crest of some hadrosaurs, a forward-facing, laterally compressed bony crest running across the top of the skull perpendicular to the body's axis, a structure so unusual that the research team struggled to identify a functional explanation for it. Paleontologists eventually nicknamed it Elvisaurus, the Elvis dinosaur, a 6-meter predator with a pompadour, hunting through a forest that covered the South Pole. 90 million years ago, Antarctica had its own apex predator, and it looked like it was going to a concert.
Cryolophosaurus hunted, which means something was there to be hunted. Glacialisaurus hammeri, found in the same Transantarctic mountain formation, the same geological period, provided the answer. A large sauropodomorph, a long-necked herbivore, 6 to 8 meters in length, moving through the Antarctic forest on 4 legs, feeding from the upper canopy. Prey. The ecosystem was complete. Predator and prey in a functioning food web at the South Pole. The same biological architecture that operated everywhere else on Earth during the Cretaceous. Apex predator, large herbivore, smaller species filling the spaces between, existed here at the bottom of the world. Then came Antarctopelta oliveroi, an ankylosaur, a heavily armored dinosaur, body covered in bony plates called osteoderms, tail ending in a bony club used as a weapon against predators. Compact, powerful, defensive. Why armor? Why a weapon? Because Cryolophosaurus was there. Antarctopelta did not evolve its armor in isolation. It evolved it in response to a predator that shared its environment, a predator that made armor necessary for survival in the Antarctic jungle. The ecosystem was not just present, it was engaged, competing, evolving in response to itself, exactly as every other Cretaceous environment on Earth was doing, at the South Pole.
Here is the question that the bones do not answer. How did they get there? 90 million years ago, the tectonic configuration of the southern hemisphere was different, but not dramatically so. Antarctica was connected to South America through a land bridge, the same bridge that would, tens of millions of years later, allow ground sloths and terror birds to migrate north. The species we have found in Antarctica have relatives in South America, in Australia, in what was then the connected southern landmass of Gondwana. They walked. The jungle spread across connected land. The dinosaurs followed the jungle. They arrived in Antarctica, found a functioning ecosystem with sufficient food and warmth, and stayed. They did not know they were at the South Pole. They did not know they were on a continent that would, in geological time, drift further south, cool dramatically, and entomb
everything they had built under 2 kilometers of ice. They simply lived. Cryolophosaurus hunted through the dark months and the light months. Antarctopelta moved through the undergrowth, its armor scraping against ancient ferns. Glacialisaurus reached upward into a canopy that blocked the polar summer sun. None of them saw what was coming. The ice did not arrive quickly enough for any individual to notice. But it arrived.
The cooling began approximately 34 million years ago. Not an event, a process. Slow by human standards, rapid by geological ones. The tectonic separation of Antarctica from South America opened the Drake Passage, creating the Antarctic Circumpolar Current, an ocean current that isolated Antarctica from the warm water circulation of the rest of the southern hemisphere. The temperature dropped. The jungle contracted toward the coasts. Then, further. The dinosaurs were already gone. The asteroid impact 66 million years ago had ended the non-avian dinosaurs everywhere on Earth. But the forest that had survived the transition from the Cretaceous to the Paleogene, that had outlasted the extinction event, that had continued growing in the post-asteroid world, that forest retreated, then disappeared. The ice advanced, layer by layer, year by year, century by century. The roots that had spread through Antarctic soil for tens of millions of years were frozen, compressed, buried under accumulating ice. The bones of Cryolophosaurus, Antarctopelta, Glacialisaurus, frozen where they fell, preserved in the cold that killed their world. 2 kilometers of ice above them. The jungle beneath, unchanged, waiting. Preserved in the only way that works at this scale: time. In the Transantarctic Mountains, the rock that contains the bones of Cryolophosaurus is exposed at the surface. Erosion has cut through the ice and sediment to reveal the Jurassic and Cretaceous formations beneath. Researchers reach it after days of travel across some of the most hostile terrain on Earth, work in temperatures that require every piece of equipment to be specially adapted, and extract fossil material from rock that was formed when this continent was warm enough to grow ferns. The contrast is absolute. The paleontologist crouching in -30-degree wind, carefully brushing sediment from a 6-meter predator that lived in a jungle at this same latitude. The same place, the same rock, different worlds separated by 90 million years of planetary history. And the work continues. Every Antarctic summer, teams return. More bones, more pollen, more root systems, more evidence of a world so different from the one we inhabit that it requires sustained effort to accept it as real. Not mythology, not speculation. Evidence. Measurable, photographable, datable, peer-reviewed evidence. Antarctica was a jungle. The proof is in the sediment, in the pollen, in the root cells preserved under microscopy, in the 6-meter predator with a pompadour whose bones were found in a mountain range currently buried in snow.
Under 2 kilometers of ice, right now, as you watch this, the remains of that jungle exist. Not a memory of it, not a chemical trace. The physical material, compressed, frozen, preserved in the permanent cold of the Antarctic ice sheet. Wood cells, root networks, spores, the organic architecture of a forest that grew here when the world was different, and the bones of the animals that walked through it. Cryolophosaurus, the Elvis dinosaur, whose skull crest served a purpose we still debate, whose hunting range covered terrain that now requires the most sophisticated cold weather equipment humanity has ever built to cross. Antarctopelta, armored against a predator that no longer exists, in a forest that no longer exists, on a continent that no longer resembles anything it once was. Glacialisaurus, moving through canopy that blocked polar sunlight, feeding on plants whose descendants we have never identified because the lineage ended with the ice. They are all still there, under the ice, waiting with the patience of things that do not know they are waiting. The jungle is gone. The ice replaced it. But the record of what was there, the roots, the pollen, the bones, remains. We found it. And what we found rewrites everything we thought we knew about the most extreme continent on Earth.